Welcome, everyone. Today's guest is someone whose work has had a profound impact on me and my own healing journey. Mark Vicente is a South African-born filmmaker, best known for co-directing the documentary What the Bleep Do We Know, and later for his courageous role as a whistleblower in exposing the NXIVM cult. His experiences were chronicled in the HBO series The Vow, where we watched him and other former members unravel coercive tactics that kept them trapped. Watching The Vow was a turning point for me. It was the first time I saw someone articulate the inner workings of a high control group in a way that mirrored my own experience in a large group awareness training. I remember sending Mark a message on Instagram a few years back, practically shouting, "Oh my God, I'm in a cult, I need help." That moment started me down the path of recognizing the psychological and the existential injuries I had endured, and eventually speaking out as a whistleblower myself. Mark has since dedicated himself to studying cult dynamics and narcissistic abuse and to helping others understand and recover from coercive control. I'm grateful to have him here to share his story and also his insights into the playbook of narcissists and to explore how our experiences overlap. So, Mark, thank you very much for joining me. Could you start by telling the listeners just a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, and first of all, I'm honored that you're up at midnight talking to me. That's very cool. That is dedication.
Well, thank you.
It's what we got to do, right? So I was born in South Africa, and at a very early age, I recognized something was wrong. I was born in apartheid era South Africa, and I was constantly trying to figure out like what's wrong. Why are people behaving the way they're behaving? Why do people hate each other? And that propelled me to the idea of like somehow I'm going to change the world and make it better. And filmmaking was the way I was going to do it. And so What the Bleep was sort of the culmination of that at that time in my life. But the other thing is I also had this deep desire to understand not only how people work, but how I work. And so that led me into, a lot of different, religious things and new agey things and spiritual things. And I've been in more than one cult. And my life was two things. It was filmmaking and it was, this inner journey. The thing that I didn't understand that people could abuse spirituality in the way that they do and personal growth in the way that they do. I didn't understand that this sort of wolf in sheep's clothing. For me, getting out of NXIVM was a hell of a shock because I realized that the person that I admired, that was like my mentor, was actually a monster. And I hadn't I hadn't seen it until towards the end. And I was like, oh shit, something's wrong. It was a huge shock to my system. And so once I got out, approached law enforcement, which did not work at first. And, some of the stuff that I'm talking about is not chronicled in the vow, like the attempts that I made to talk to the police in various countries, various divisions of the FBI. Nobody would listen because they couldn't understand what was I talking about. And we finally got a prosecutor who did understand. But my obsession began with trying to understand what was the pathology of these people that ran these organizations. And eventually I realized, the pathology is the root of all of these organizations. Like every shitty narcissistic relationship or high control group, at its root is or was a leader with a pathology at minimum narcissism all the way up to sociopathy or psychopathy. So that's been my obsession the last few years, is trying to understand what I missed, what I didn't understand. So, that's my obsession still making movies. I'm about to release probably the end of the year or maybe the beginning of next year, a film about narcissism, which Kelly, you know about because I've talked about it quietly in the last few months. But yeah, that's my obsession now.
Well, I'm grateful for that obsession because it's really providing a lot of opportunity for understanding and knowledge in relation to these pathologies as such. So one of the biggest questions that I get asked is like, why did you join a cult? I get that asked myself, and
yeah,
you've said in the past too that you don't know that you're joining a cult when you go in, and people just don't join cults. They join a really good thing. So, what actually defines a cult? Because there is some vernacular around large group awareness trainings, and then they tip into a cult. So, what defines that?
I don't know that I have a clear definition. I wrote one down the other day, which I can't remember, but there's a couple of things. I mean, at the root, there's the pathology of the leader. There's coercion, there's control. I mean, if you take basically a coercively controlling relationship a narcissistically abusive relationship and you upscale it to many people, that's basically, what a cult is. It's the same thing. As far as why people join, it's funny because you've been asked the question, I've been asked the question. What I'm starting to say to people is like, it's like asking a victim of domestic abuse, let's say a woman, why did you hook up with, or why did you marry a domestic abuser? Well, she didn't think she was. So for me, I had an idealism. I mean, I still do, but I had an idealism and I wanted to fix the world, fix myself. And I joined something that I thought would make things better, would improve the world. I did not understand that what I was joining was a group that had a lot of covert shit going on underneath. And that's why I say nobody joins a cult, because nobody does. Nobody knowingly says, you know what I want to do is I want to join an organization that's going to scare the shit out of me, coerce me, blackmail me, and destroy my psyche, because that's really that's my jam. Like nobody does that. Like you join,
No.
You have stars in your eyes about whatever. You join the thing. And sometimes you join because the people are awesome. I mean, there's one group I joined a long, long time ago. The people were so awesome. I was like, okay, the teachings are a bit weird, but the people are amazing. So maybe the teachings are helping these people be amazing. So I want to hang out with these people. And that's a lot of what they do as well. I mean, one of the things that happens in a cult for sure, the same way as in a narcissistic abusive relationship, the love bombing that occurs in a relationship occurs in a cult. Like anybody who first goes during what I call the induction process into a cult, the amount of love bombing, like that they say things like, you know what, your family, you think just like us. We've been looking for someone like you. God, you really understand the teachings. It's all the stuff they say. And they're so high energy and so like high vibe, quote unquote, that it feels really good. And you kind of feel like you've kind of found your people. Now, just to back up, a lot of people are searching because they've been in bad situations. Like one of the things for me is like coming from apartheid era South Africa, I thought like people are really fucked up and doing some really bad things. I wish there were people out there that maybe thought more like me or were kind or whatever. And then you meet the people that are kind and amazing and you think, this is my tribe. These are my people. And, sometimes you're coming from something that doesn't feel good and you think you find something that is good. Most everybody thinks, I think not most everybody, I think 100% of everybody who joins a cult, generally speaking, thinks they've found something really good and they found some amazing people and they found answers to maybe lifelong questions that they may have had. And that's certainly what has happened to me numerous times.
Yeah, I can relate to that actually, in that understanding now, like what was my bait, like going in and how did they hook me and grab me? And then it was all of those particular things that you just mentioned. And like I joined seeking to advance my potential and, to regulate and balance my emotions. I basically became like a Navy SEAL at self-improvement. And everything was about doing the work, like do the work, do the work, do the work relative to up integration and balancing. So, how do you see that self-development groups leverage us and keep us hooked?
Well, I think the one thing they do, they're very good at doing, and this is part of what I think are called tactics that I define. I call it data mining. They mine you, like with intake forms, with questions, with whatever it is. They mine your data. They figure out what you yearn for, what you're afraid of, what your vulnerabilities are. And then they leverage that because what they're so good at doing is showing you exactly how screwed up you are. Like you think you go in and you'll think, I got a few problems. And then they show you, oh, no, it's not a few. It's your entire personality. Like everything you're doing is causing your life to be awful. And they'll show you in a way that seems pretty reasonable. This thing you did here where you sabotage yourself is because of this thing in your childhood, or this thing that's inside of you, this missing thing that's inside of you, or the belief that you're missing something or whatever it is. And pretty soon, especially at the beginning, you realize, my God, I mean, that's true. Like when you start to like plumb the depths of your own psyche, which they're helping you do, you discover a lot of things and a lot of things are true. Do I have these insecurities? Yes. Do I behave this way because of the insecurity? Yes. Do I sabotage myself because of this insecurity and because of the way I behave? Yes. So you start to feel more and more like, I got to fix this. Because then they, in my case, and I don't know about in your case, but in my case, they say these problems you're having is what's causing not only your life to be a problem, but the people around you. Don't you love the people around you? Don't you care about the people around you? Don't you care about the world? Do you think you can change the world? As screwed up and angry as you are? Literally, they said that to me. And I was
That
like, well, no, I don't think I can. And well, what kind of world would you create the way you are right now? I'd create a very angry, divisive world, right? So before you try and change the world, let's spend some time fixing you. And if you're like an honest person who really does know how to dig in and feel stuff, you're like, man, that's true. That's accurate. The problem is that fixing never ends. So the premise, I don't know if the same for you, but the premise is you have a problem. And even though they say you can overcome it, the thing is, there's always more stuff they tell you about yourself. You're never going to get fixed ever. So that's one of
That
the starting points for me.
that was very much what happened for me too as well. Like it was ad infinitum and a constant state of actually having to do integration and opening up the next vectors of the next void of what you have created, because you're at cause. Always we were at cause, and you were anything on the external world was a reflection of your internal world. If there was an issue related to that, you were at cause. So therefore, any time that you would speak out or would have a concern or have doubt about it, that was
Out of cause.
out of cause. But then it would be reverse attribution back to you that you were the victim of, if you say, hang on a minute, how can that be true? And how could that possibly be true? And yeah, and then we have the aphorisms and the word salad that goes on top of all of these particular things to actually keep you in a state of abstraction.
Yeah. The out of cause thing is so interesting. I mean, I remember it's so interesting. You get stuck in this mind state, because I remember in our training, you're trained to listen to people and you're trained to listen to where they're out of cause.
Yes.
And you've been told, like, whenever somebody blames, whenever they point the finger somewhere else, they're out of cause. So they're not in reality. So now you're dealing with, because you're superior, because your perspective is superior, they don't understand that they're not in reality. So like, if they work with us, we're going to get them in reality. The problem is that you dehumanize people, because I think responsibility is great. I think that the journey of being human is, you start helpless, you feel like you have no agency, and more you get agency. And when you're a little kid, you blame everything else. And eventually at some point you go like, yeah, okay, that was me. You start to realize, oh, I actually can do things if I realize like I'm the one doing them. All of that's true. And all of that's important. But I think there's a way to help people get there. And I don't think the way to do that is to engender a kind of self-hatred in them for all their failings. And that to me is what happens in high control groups, is all of your failings, you start to feel a self-hatred. And it's almost like, I was in one group once where the whole thing was about the human in you is shit. You need to be more godlike, So like everything about being human, which is perfectly normal and natural, is bad. And so what happens is you sort of start to dissociate, and you started to pretend that you're, so-called better than you are. And you basically numb yourself. And that's something I found that when I started to wake up in 2017, I realized like I really numbed myself, because I was trying so hard to behave a certain way. And often these groups, which are very cult-like, you feel like you're being watched all the time, because your superiors are watching you all the time. And you feel in a constant state of fear. And it does start to feel like you're in an abusive relationship. So I just think this self-hatred thing, just to go back for a second, the way I think now is, I think everybody's just great the way they are. Like, you're a fully formed human being. You have unless you have some kind of brain pathology, you have everything you need. Yes, there may be some misunderstandings, but I'm not going to knock somebody over the head because they misunderstand something, but you're not broken. You don't have a hole inside of you, and you don't have shit that needs to be fixed. Because if you start to think that that is who you are, you become very susceptible to charlatans who say, well, I have the answer. I have the answer to all the things that ail you. And as part of the love bombing process, which I think was more extreme with me, is they studied a whole bunch about me before I even met them. And I'd mentioned this on certain podcasts, maybe my Patreon as well. They researched everything about me. They had meetings about me, so that when they finally met me, they had my number. I did not stand a chance. They had my number. They knew, because I was very open. I was getting on television. I was getting on the radio. I was talking about the things I yearned for, the things I wanted to change. People would ask me questions. I'd be very honest as I could be about myself and my failings. And they made note of all of that. And then they delivered the bomb, the fix for what I believe ailed me. And it was so intoxicating that I could overcome these things that I struggled with my whole life. That I could overcome these things seemed fantastical and incredible. But I was like, you know what? If there's a chance, I'm in. You know how it goes.
Very good selling point. So they created the fantasy and leveraged your shame and exploited your vulnerability.
Yes.
Sold you the fantasy and then created the shared fantasy space and implanted that into you from that perspective.
Yeah. And, again, people might say, yeah, but like, well, so you were prone to fantasy. Yeah. Like everybody else, give a
I think it's
person
part.
enough pain. It's just like, yeah, I wish this, I wish that, I wish the other. And someone says, yeah, we can do that. And especially in the case of, I don't know what it was like for you, but in the case of our so-called tech, it seemed very effective. At the beginning, it seemed very, very effective until later I understood what it was actually doing. But I overcame a whole bunch of things and I was like, holy shit, this is like incredible. Like, what if I could overcome this? What if I could overcome that? And as somebody who felt that there was fundamentally, and what I'm about to say is a very human thing, I felt that there was something fundamentally wrong with me that needed to be fixed, which is human. I wanted to fix it. And instead of saying there's nothing wrong with you, that's the end of the training, they were like, oh, that's not all. Let us catalog the problems that you're not even aware of. And I go, well, how do you know that? Because you said this thing, and you said that thing. And there's this whole meta-analysis of everything I said. And I thought they were super, super smart. It's like, holy shit, well, that's true. And listen, a lot of the stuff is true. A lot of these things are built. There's a lot of truth that they build on.
What
they
then
have
tips
to.
it in? What then tips it into like the coercion and the mind control phase? If there is a lot of good things, like how does it then tip over? And you mentioned, like there was a lot of good things in the beginning, but then, there was something that must have actually changed. Was it relative to the tech? For me, there was the methodology, and I have to agree with that. There was some good things in the beginning, and it did help me with many things in my life, but there was never informed consent of what was actually could happen in the future and how long you use this. It was not ever peer reviewed, this methodology. I'm not sure what Nixium's was, their tech, if that was peer reviewed or anything, but
Nothing was peer reviewed. It was all Scientology and NLP and a bunch of other things.
it was like a recipe, like making a cake with everything that they could grab and just hope it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the tipping point was not the tipping point. Baked into it was this never-ending quest to clean out the gunk, to clean out the confusions, to clean out the distortions, to clean out the whatever word, you want to use. It was never ending. The other problem was that in the case of what we called EMs, explorations of meaning,
Interesting, because ours was DMs.
DMs, that's interesting. You're digging down into, I think, what NLP calls like a person's primitives, your sort of pre-cognitive memories. You're digging way down there, the subconscious. And so what happens is you're very, very open. And so if I were to redo it, not that I want to, but maybe I want to take a person there and have them come to their own conclusions about what is true and not true. The problem is in that state, they called it filling in data. They would start to say things like, well, is it possible this? And is it possible that? And is it possible this was actually going on and not that? And you're like, and you're in such a state of confusion that they give you something solid to hold on to. And you're like, actually, that does make more sense. Now you've sort of rewritten your history in a very, very deep way, not just precognitively, down to the subconscious, which is basically their agenda or their philosophy. Somebody who was very good at this was Nancy Salzman. Get you in that state and then start telling you how reality actually is. That is very, very, very dangerous because you're taking a person back into an infantile state and you're rewriting their programming. And people say it can't be done. It absolutely can be done.
Absolutely. I have to agree with that. So the infantilization was there, like to parentify you in the moment, as taking you back to that initial stage of almost being a baby and then implanting their data, their tech into, by colonizing your, psyche in that format.
100%. And infantilization is like part of what I see that happens in cults. It happens in abusive relationships, not all, but a lot of them, is that what they want to do is make the cult leader mommy or daddy. They start to infantilize you. And this is the funny thing about the human psyche. A lot of people like it. A lot of people
they feel
want
safe.
to rewrite their upbringing, And so if you're going to get loved and mothered and fathered in a way that you never had it before, it feels good, This is what narcissists do, certainly malignant narcissists, this shared fantasy. They talk in psychology about this sort of, this is not the word they use, but sort of this co-mothering. It's actually, I think, Sam Vaknin that came up with the term co-mothering, I think. But it's an older psychological principle, which is basically the narcissist is going to love you the way you never got loved. It's the ideal love. That's the way they're going to present it. And in return, they want that as well. Well, it puts you in an infantile state, especially if you have childhood wounds, which cults are very good at finding out what they are. Now they're going to love you in a way that you never got loved. And you think, well, this is the solution. Because in a very primitive way, there's still that yearning. And you don't know there's other ways to there's other ways to fix that, because no amount of love from the cult leader is going to fix that. That's your own inside job. But they convince you, no, they have the solution. And in that state of infantilization, you feel euphoric. And when you're euphoric, you make stupid decisions. It's like people falling in love or falling in lust when they're teenagers. You make stupid decisions, as one should as a teenager. The
Full of
problem is
oxytocin and dopamine.
full of it. But the thing is that they know how to regress you, back into that state, and they're very good at it. I mean, but advertising does it, like a whole bunch of things do it. It's just that, when you're in that state of euphoria, and most people at the beginning of a cult situation are euphoric at some point, it imprints deeply on you. And you're like, this is the answer that I've been looking for, kind of bullshit, you know how it goes.
Yeah, exactly. That sounds like to me like the Edgar Schein, like the 3 stages of change, where they basically, thawing you out and then changing you and then refreezing you back into the state that they,
Yes.
the leader really wants to inject into you to be turned into a mini me, to be a reflection of him or her.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yes, I totally agree. We have been through similar situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The tech is really interesting to me in the, and how that affected you in Nixium. And I think I read somewhere that the FBI had confiscated that tech.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that true?
Well, I mean, they confiscated the patent, so to speak, and everything. I mean, I still have it all. I have copies. I know how it works. But I think by confiscating it, I don't know if it's true that I think nobody's allowed to use it. I don't know. But it was very effective in many ways. It's funny because I then did research on interrogation, CIA techniques,
Mm-hmm.
what happens with prisoners of war. And then I reflected on, I'd pull out the notes and look at the notes and be like, holy shit, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is. All of these techniques have been used at some point. And the thing is, and this is, I'm just rephrasing what you already said, the thing you need to do is destabilize a person first, put them in a state of complete destabilization and chaos, and then you give them something to hold on to, which is what an interrogation does. A good interrogation destabilizes the prisoner to the point that the prisoner starts to get unhinged from reality and who they are, and then offers them something concrete that they hold on to as a lifeline.
Mm-hmm.
That thing they hold on to actually pulls them further away from themselves into the agenda of the interrogator. That's exactly what happened to us as well. I just didn't realize. And it's funny because we were studying psychopathy. We were studying, stuff that happened bad. He made us study that stuff. Maybe that was his,
like his agenda
joke.
Almost hidden in plain sight.
Completely hidden in plain sight. I mean, there was a moment, I think this was just before the trial. I found, it was before the trial. I think it was a week before the trial. I found a document, a transcription of something he told me. And it was a story. It was a fictional story about a corporation and everything. And he was basically described 10 years before what he was actually doing to me and my psyche. And I had a complete meltdown. And in the vow, I think it's episode 7 or 8, at one point you just see me like bawling my eyes out. And that's the moment when I just after I read the transcription, I was like, oh my God, he was playing this game for 10 years. And so I had a meeting with the FBI the next day and I said, I just want to show you the letter. And they were like, holy shit. So they actually had me read it on the stand because they were trying to get the jury to understand who this guy was, that this guy would come up with a story, a movie idea of what he was actually doing to me.
Wow, that's amazing, but really fucked up, like really fucked up.
Dark.
Let's talk about self-sealing systems, like the way that the cults actually create that. They often deflect criticism by labeling dissent or scapegoating people. Like I'm a whistleblower, so I'm in that space at the moment as a scapegoat. And, the bounded choices that are inside of that self-sealing system. Can you talk a little bit to that? Like explain, to my listeners about that?
Yeah, I mean, basically the way I see it, and I'm not an academic, but the way I see it is that the belief system that you've now taken on seals you off from any external criticism, because what you're being told is the people on the outside are going to say this, they're going to say this, they're going to say this, they're going to say this. They say that because they're afraid, because they're confused, because they're suppressive. They're suppressive persons. They're They're evil, basically, is what suppressive person means. And so you go out into the world and you talk to people and you hear them say certain things. And now it reinforces what you believe because you've been told this is what they're going to say. And they've told you that when a person says that, that means they're suppressive. So now in this daze you're in, you think, oh, Jesus, another suppressive person, another suppressive person, another. So it's us and theming. And the us and theming is what helps create the self-sealing system, because basically the things you hear from the outside reconfirm what you've been told and make you realize like you actually do have the truth, because now you have the evidence of what you've been taught. That person said that thing about you or about the group or about the leader or whatever. And so it binds you more and more tightly, which is why, when you're trying to deal with a person who's in a cult, you never want to come straight out and say you're in a cult. You never want to come straight out and like say the leader's bad, because they've been told that you're going to hear that. So like it just proves it. You have to have them start just looking at like principles. Is it good to do this? Is it good to do that? Is it good to do this? And at some point, as you talk to them, they're going to say it's good to do that. And then you're going to ask them about something else. They're going to realize, well, that doesn't quite make sense. At first, they're going to try and rationalize it. If you keep on going long enough and they're open enough, they'll eventually realize, well, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. Like what does shunning do to people? And I say this because this is happening in the world right now. In the world, everybody's shunning everybody politically. And some of the people that are doing the shunning are people that believe in compassion and kindness and whatever. So, okay, so then is it good to shun people? And they say, well, it depends. And then they have to start contesting with, but how does that work with being compassionate and kind and understanding and open-minded? Like, you can't be open-minded and shun somebody. Then you're not open-minded,
The interesting, what you're talking about here, like my mind is still sort of has a superego interjects of, the cult voices it's still there inside, and we'll get to that in a minute. But inside of that is, we were taught that everything had an opposite, and basically everything was unconditional love. So those particular things are, everybody was the same. And so we had this aphorism that we would say, the seer, the seeing, and the seen are all the same. So that's a reflective component that was in there. And then there is everything in the world is actually unconditional love. Like there is no good or bad. There is no hell or heaven. There is no evil. That everything is just unconditional love. So having that abstraction running around in my mind and then to layer in, we were also taught that compassion, we didn't want to have compassion, because to have compassion meant that you were going to suffer with somebody else, because com meant with, and passion means to separate. Passio is the separation of the ions. So why would you want to suffer with somebody? So why would you want to have compassion for them or with them?
That's so interesting. So compassion equals suffering.
Mm-hmm. And there were certain words that were taken out of our vernacular too, as well, like passion. We were instructed not to use that word because it meant to suffer. The separation, like passio, the separation of the ions, and there was a lot of correlation to physics talks inside of this. So the confusion around the particular methodologies or the ideology that these cult leaders actually use. What I found for myself, it was actually getting me ungrounded and couldn't understand if there was anything that was good or bad. So our morals and ethics were also removed because there was no such things as morals and ethics, which I find the confusion is also nested inside of these cultic systems as well. Like you're in a constant state of questioning all the time. But then if you go and question the leader, look out.
Right. Exactly. No, I've had that happen in a few groups. And the other thing that's interesting about there is no good and bad, I always found it interesting that it protected the cult leader. Like when the cult leader did something bad, well, there is no good and bad. Like it doesn't matter. I'm doing this to help you. But what was so interesting is people that said bad things about the cult leader were bad. And I was thinking, how can it be no good and bad, but the people saying stuff about you, they're bad? Like either there is no good and bad, or there is. Like, which one is it?
Which one is it today?
Yeah, which one is it today? But it's interesting because, as I've said, when you're in this infantilized state, your normal rational cognitive thinking has gone offline to some degree. when you're
And
looking at
because
people in a
you're
cult,
putting the leader on a pedestal because you are,
yes,
being parentified in that state. So you're looking
exactly,
up to them for.
exactly. Exactly. I mean, I really think that when you're looking at a cult member, it's good to look at like what you're looking at is a prisoner of war basically in a camp, or you're looking at a domestic abuse victim who's been thoroughly brainwashed. You're not dealing with the real them really, because what's happened at this point is this alternate cult self has been built, and they're in some ways this is not true what I'm saying. I'm just metaphorically. It's like they're residing a little more in the alternate cult self than their true selves. Once they wake up, like once the cult leader goes to prison, once the thing gets destroyed, once whatever happens, they start to merge back. This is not scientific what I'm saying. They start to merge back with their real self. And they're like, what was I thinking? And then you look back at who you were and you're like, how did I think that? And of course you thought that because a lot of you was offline.
And that is exactly what happened to me. Like after stepping out, there was a great deal of confusion that required a lot of intervention and integration from, specialists, cult recovery specialists, for me to understand that there was a false persona that was laid over the top of my authentic self, and to navigate yourself back to that, but not really knowing who is the true sense of
Yeah.
self, who is my authentic self, especially after being in for so long. Um, that is quite traumatic within itself. That is actually traumatizing.
It is. It is. I mean, you're dealing with like existential things. I mean, a person's psyche is
Mm-hmm.
very, very destabilizing. And I'm sure you know this. Like when you first come out and you start to wake up, you don't know who you are. The ground feels like it's moving because somatically it feels like it really is moving. It doesn't feel stable. And that can last
Absolutely.
quite a while.
Yeah.
And it's extremely, extremely traumatizing. What was so interesting is like we were in the middle of that and making the vow, so because I started,
Wow.
I was shooting, for years, but then when I realized what was going on, I began documenting everything. And I began documenting everything because I realized, oh, they're going to throw me in prison. They're going to make up some shit, pay somebody off and throw me in prison. So I need to document everything.
Mm-hmm.
So the vow in some ways is you see us at our most messed up because we're still defragmenting our drives. We don't know who we are. We just know that the only thing I knew when I got out is he's bad and what he did was bad. That's all I knew. And what he did to my friends, very bad. And I'm going to do something about it. Those are the only things I knew.
That must have been incredibly difficult to go through that phase and still be. Yeah, I can feel you on that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to touch on the pathology relative to narcissism, because I know that you are working on a documentary relative to this. And one of the really interesting components for me inside of this organization was we were also taught and instructed that labels were not to be used. Everything was to be reduced or reduced down to a subset of traits. So, as a narcissist, there was no such thing as narcissists. That was in our vernacular as well. There was no such thing as narcissists. Like I would be telling, there's no such thing as a narcissist. There's just people living true to their value systems. And narcissists are actually a label, and labels are made up of a subset of actionable traits. So if the person that you're judging as a narcissist, they did something to you, we would have to break it down into these subcomponents, right down to, reducible actions, and then find out how that actually served us. That was the integration process.
It served us, of course. Yes, of course.
Yeah, so I find that really interesting that what would be the purpose of labels, and how would that actually protect us, and how would it be useful to us as people that might be inside high control systems to understand the use of a label.
Yeah. It's just funny. I'm just thinking about a metaphor that's really interesting. Like if you're driving a car and you're going to slowly drive and hit a concrete wall, and the label inside your car says 10 miles an hour, 10 kilometers an hour, whatever, you have a sense of like how much that's going to hurt you. If you look at a label that says 100 miles an hour and you crash into that wall, like that's the shorthand for like what the effect's going to be. So I think labels are actually very, very important. Now, are people over-labeled? Yeah. Right now, everybody labels everybody a narcissist. They didn't agree with me. They're narcissists. Yeah, that's bullshit. You can actually figure out what a person is who has NPD. Yes, the traits are involved, but there's certain things that occur over time that you can say, yeah, that person's, a person that likes to hurt people. Let's call them something. Let's not sit there and go like, well, let's reduce it down to labels and blah, 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 blah. And by that time, they've killed another person. Like, I think labels are very, very important. Now, labels are simplifications. So can we oversimplify? Yes, absolutely. Can labels be misapplied? Yes, but labels are a good shorthand, and in some ways, labels are like a packet that contain, in this case, a label contains a lot of traits and behaviors. Why do I want to spend an hour going through every single trait and behavior when I can just say, it appears based on this person's behavior, they might have NPD. Now, am I able to say they have NPD? No, I'm not allowed to, because the medical boards and whatever would come after me. Can't diagnose, but you can, it's so interesting. That feeling you get in your body when you're around somebody that's not a good person? That's kind of a label.
In itself, right? This is probably one for your playbook, is that the label of narcissist was removed. But then also in the teachings, we were also taught that to have an instinct was to be of a lower consciousness. And so
yes.
Our feelings and our emotions and our sensations were lies. They were lying to us.
Yes, that's important. You have to disable a person's belief in those things so that you can get away with what you want to do. Because let's say people feel creeped out around, I don't know, somebody who's a pedophile who happens to be a cult leader. You have to just try and disable, that kind of feeling they get around you. So it's easy. Just tell them those feelings aren't valid. I think that instinct in our system was called, I think it was either class 5 or class 7 data. I can't remember, but it was a lower level of data. It existed, but it's very vague and non-scientific, because everything was about being scientific. It is interesting though. You're right. I've seen this time and time again. They take away your ability to discern. And I found now, set aside the hardcore scientific labels, I found right now is if you feel icked out around somebody, ICK, icked, good. Then listen to that and trust it. Trust it, because I don't know how you feel, but I realized much, much later that there were red flags going off all the time in my body, but I was conditioned to think, well, that's not valid.
Yeah, same. Absolutely the same, because they're relative to sensations, and therefore it was a half truth. It wasn't a full truth. And, so yeah, interesting.
I'm so with you.
Same playbook.
And it's the same playbook. And the reason it's the same playbook, by the way, is because the pathology behaves the same way. That's why labels are so interesting and important. If you look at malignant narcissism and the way somebody behaves who has that diagnosis, there is no real diagnosis of malignant narcissism, but let's say MPD or ASPD, what they do to people is the same. The organizations that they run operate the same. The results are the same. The relationships are the same. If they run a country, the country's the same. It's all the same. That's why I think the pathology is so important, because once you identify the pathology, you understand, is, let's say a president or a leader, is the president or leader impulsive? Are they calculating? Are they cold and calculating and unemotional with no fear like a psychopath? Are they impulsive like a sociopath? Do they need excessive admiration? Is everything they're doing, and I'm thinking about one particular leader right now, I'm not going to name, is everything about getting admiration? Well, then you know how they're going to behave and what they're going to do. I think that labels are fantastic. If you understand that a person has a certain kind of narcissism that requires admiration, you know what they're going to do.
And then you know how to navigate it if you're inside of it too as well, because you can map the pattern and be aware of what is actually occurring. So therefore your critical thought will actually stay intact. And the same with your intuition and your instincts, they're there to protect you.
Yes.
Unfortunately, for myself and many other people, there is no understanding of what the patternicity is associated to these particular pathologies. And I think it's a bloody great job that what you're doing is bringing awareness to that. And it's something that I wish to do as well, is to help people understand when they're in space with these particular people that wanting to cause some kind of harm, whether it's actually conscious or unconscious, but to have the awareness of the patternicity that's occurring.
Yeah.
So that they can create solid boundaries and, protect themselves.
Exactly. And also one of my big things I'm trying to do is I want to dissuade people from the Pollyanna belief is that everybody's good.
Yeah.
Everybody's well-meaning, everybody's good, everybody has your best interest at heart. I mean, it's sweet and it's nice, and it's delusional, but like it
But it's
means
just
you
not
won't see
true.
them coming. You won't see them
No.
coming. You just, and like people that say, like, I would never join a cult or I would never get involved in that. It's like, yeah, you know what? You have a blind spot because anybody can get fooled. Very, very, very smart people can get fooled. I mean, I did a
Mhm.
podcast interview, my second yesterday with Sarma Melgalis. They made the Netflix show Bad Vegan about her. Sarma is very smart.
I listened to
She
that
actually found
today.
out that she found out that she has Asperger's, like type
Yeah.
1 autism.
Yeah.
Sarma's brilliant. I mean, I've been her friend for like, almost 2 years. She's a very smart woman. But
That's amazing.
he had her number. He figured that he read her blogs. He read her. You listened to the episode. He read her stuff, and he knew how to get her, how to control
Mhm.
her. So, yeah,
That's interesting. I've also sort of researched a little bit of Karen Mitchell's work on the PPP, the
yeah.
predatory personality.
Persistent predatory personality. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. There was a period of time that I actually spent quite a bit of time actually in Africa researching animal behavior in the Mara and watching the lions stalk the prey animals. And then I lived in Mexico for a bit. This was post coming out of the cold and having to reintegrate my instinct. And being in Mexico, that really did bring that online because you had to have a sense of awareness because it's very real in those third world countries that the way that you portray yourself, otherwise you will be predated upon. And it
Yes.
is really quite rife in our Western world, and not only inside self-development organizations, in businesses, in relationships. It's through all tiers of countries too, like you mentioned before. So I think it's a beautiful thing that you are bringing this awareness to it. People seem to have more of an understanding if there's a physical abuse. Like I'm going to link back to Nixium now. The girls in there, it blew up because of the branding,
Hmm.
but the psychological abuse that happened that is intangible for people to be able to see. I don't know about you, but I feel that that's way more nefarious than, because in essence, Raniere actually by proxy had that in creation through the psyche of other people. So
Yeah.
that is
You
something
know,
that I feel really needs to be spoken to, the invisible harm and like
yeah.
the psychological, injury that happens and
It's very
moral
interesting
injury.
because, yeah, it's very interesting because the legal system doesn't understand that. You know,
Mm.
did you see there was a story recently on the internet? I don't know if it's Twitter or where it was, about the looking at doing brain scans of children that are in abusive households,
No, I
and they
haven't seen
look
that.
like the brain scans of soldiers at the end of a war.
Wow.
And I was like, that is interesting. I
That
mean,
is
that makes
really
perfect
interesting.
sense. Now, you're right. There's no, like, how do you measure that? Well, maybe one day brain scans can measure that. But just in terms of this, the damage to the psyche, I'm not a woman, so I'm going to say something that I've heard other women say. So please,
Mhm.
I want your audience to understand. I've had women say to me that have been raped, that the rape was bad, but the disemboweling of their souls through narcissistic abuse was worse. And I was like, really? But it's such a violation. They said, yeah, it was a violation. But this long-term destruction of your psyche and your sense of self and who you are, it's devastating because, and the people that said, like, yes, I can be raped, but I still have a me that had that terrible thing happen. Now, again, I've had about 3 women say this to me, and I've spoken to psychologists and they've said, yeah, that's what they hear as well. And again, please, I don't want anybody to think that I think that rape is not bad. It's awful. It's just so interesting to me that people report that this psychological abuse is so profoundly harmful.
Because for me, it was like a raping of the mind. It was a raping of my soul, and absolutely can attest to what you just said, that it was like, um, yeah, it was like a perpetrator, penetrated inside of myself, of my soul, and then took that from me without my consent. And that definitely, yeah, like really fucked
And
up.
it is fucked up. And, I think what's so hard is that when people are questioned about the psychological damage, they have a hard time finding the evidence because they're also like, I don't know. But like 10 years in an abusive relationship, it's death by 1,000 cuts. It's
Yeah.
the accumulation over time of these things.
That's the
you know,
definition
that,
of complex trauma, like storing through time in there, and then eventually the cup's full, and bang, it has to explode and come out in a form.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and again, like you've still got that cult self, but then what I found happens is that it becomes like an internal warfare that occurs. You
Mm,
know, like that initial authentic true sense of self is then a negotiation with that false self, the cult self that's layered on top of it. You know? And
yes,
that
yes.
in it that recovery process from that has been the hardest thing for me to navigate.
That makes perfect sense. And I'm going to just do an and there. The real us is also struggling with shame and a whole bunch of other things.
Which is natural for I feel, which is natural. It's part of our us as a human. Inside of the organization that I was in, we were taught to integrate shame. You know, I won't go into the details on how we were taught to do that, but I feel that it wasn't an integration; it was actually suppression. So
Hmm.
therefore, and because the teachings around of sensations, feelings, and emotions were illusions, so therefore they were half truths. So therefore,
Mm.
shame and guilt and resentment were all, you know, either feelings or emotions. So therefore, they were half truths, and we weren't allowed to actually navigate through emotion. We were only allowed to navigate through perception, and it disconnected our mind from our body.
You
So
know,
that's recognition of that.
and then there's the feeling of shame because you're having the feelings because you've
Mm-hmm.
been told you shouldn't be having the feelings. It's really interesting to me. I'm beginning to think a lot more about, obviously I think about the pathology of whoever the leader is, but I'm recognizing more and more that these people that are leading, that are doing these things, creating organizations like this, they have a level of dissociation themselves and they can't look at their own shame. And so because they can't look at their own shame, they deny it and then look for it in everybody else. So what they're very good at, this was something that Dr. Dan Shaw helped me understand. They project their disowned shame onto their subjects and then get their subjects, their followers, to feel all their shame that they're not feeling, that they're not willing to feel. And they also, I'm beginning to see more and more with some of the leaders, they also have this kind of narcissistic amnesia where they do shitty things and then they can't remember that they did them because they can't face up to the fact that that's who they are. So they deny that those things ever happened. And so you ask them a question about the thing they did and they're like, look at you like, you know, you have two heads. Like, what do you mean? That
The
never happened.
gaslighting, the gaslighting
Yeah.
comes in.
Some of them are doing it because I think some of them do it because they know they did it. Some of them I think don't know they did it because they can't. You know, it was very interesting. I'm not going to name the person, but there was one very, very high level, high ranking person in Nixon who used to have like rage attacks in a high leadership position, used to have rage attacks at people. And then when questioned, and sometimes I did the questioning the next day, like, what the fuck happened? They couldn't remember that it happened. They were
Interesting.
mystified that it
Interesting.
happened. I'm like, well,
Interesting.
that's interesting. And I didn't know what I was looking at until much later. And I understood more about narcissism and how shame is basically compartmentalized away. Because if they look at their shame, it's like they die because they've built a false self that doesn't have shame, that's shameless. So if they look at the shame, they feel like they're going to cease to exist because the false self it's vapors, it's cardboard.
Wow. Interesting. Really interesting. Also, too, I've read narcissists actually they don't have fear, and because they can't experience anxiety.
Yeah, some of them, well, I think narcissistic psychopaths don't have fear. I think that's way at the end of the scale. I think generally people that are narcissistic that have NPD, even people that are sociopathic, they do have anxiety. The scary ones are the ones that have no anxiety. So a true narcissistic psychopath has no anxiety. There's one I've interviewed in my film. He has no anxiety whatsoever. None. And it's chilling
Wow.
to have
Wow.
multiple conversations with him because you realize it's like you're talking to another species.
Interesting. They are definitely not human, like another form, another species. Wow. So
Yeah.
thank you for taking the time to actually, you know, converse and speak with
Yeah.
me to this today. Now that we've started talking about your upcoming documentary, do you want to share with the listeners a bit about that?
Yeah. So basically, it's now called The Narcissist Playbook. You can find it at thenarcissistplaybook.com. We are pretty much done. We're about to put out a campaign probably the next month or so about it. And what we did, and it's been a long process. It's been like a 4-year process making this thing. But what we did is we interviewed, of course, people that have been abused by narcissists. We interviewed clinicians, neuroscientists to sort of understand what was going on. And then very early on, we made the decision to go and interview self-confessed narcissists. Now, people have issues about that, of course, but we've interviewed 4 self-confessed narcissists who have varying degrees of the pathology. And it's very, very enlightening and very disturbing to listen to how they think, how they operate, how they view people. But the reason for that is because I want people to really understand what they're dealing with. So we have a film that we're exceptionally proud of. People will, they just go and follow. I mean, they can just find me on Instagram and they can figure out how to get there. But we're gonna start a campaign pretty soon about that and put out a trailer. But it's a bit of a shock to the system for some people. I think people that have been through the abuse, that know what they've been through, will be like, thank God this film's out. I want to show everybody. I think there's some people that have been through it but don't know what they were dealing with, that for them it's a shock. I mean, I had one person in Hollywood a couple of months ago, saw a rough cut, very well-known person, and they were just horrified. And they said to me at the end, they said, if I'd known this 25 years ago, my life would have been different, completely different choices. I wish this existed 25 years ago. And that's my hope, is to have people understand the pattern of how it works, so that they go like, oh, I've seen this, or I'm in the middle of this, or, oh, that's what happened to me.
Well, that's exactly when I watched The Vow. That was how I started to, like, I already had started asking questions and things had started to surface within me. But by actually watching that was like, oh my God, this is what's actually occurring. And so I feel that these documentaries are absolutely necessary and helpful for people like myself and others that may be listening.
I think they are.
That are looking for that. So I appreciate that you're doing that.
Absolutely.
One final.
And the two, I just want to tell you, the 2 for me that were the things that helped me was one called Holy Hell, which I recommend everybody sees, and Going Clear. Like those 2 helped me wake up.
Going Clear the other day, actually. True.
It's funny. They're all like, it's like everybody says, oh, do they go to the same university? I'm like, it's the same pathology. So they all behave the same way. Just varying degrees of like covert or overt or whatever,
I wonder if there was a university somewhere that actually said, okay, let's start up a self-development organization and do this. One final question for you before we go is, what practices would you recommend for anybody that may be exiting out of a coercive controlling system or a cult?
Yeah, one thing I recommend, this is something that Richard Grannon mentioned, and I was like, oh, that's what I did. And I realized that's what I did. So one of the things that he talks about that's important is when you come out of a cult, your morality has been messed with.
Absolutely.
Your moral compass is like spinning in weird ways. And so one of the first things you need to do is figure out what is good and what is bad, and what you like and what you don't like. Like, it's really important, because you've been conditioned to believe that things you don't like are good, being violated in whatever way.
Mm-hmm.
You have to come out, and you're going to have the interjects of the cult leader or the teaching's talking to, but you have to, on your own terms, figure out. Nobody can tell you what feels good and what feels bad, and what is good and what is bad, That's
fantastic. And for anybody that's listening, that navigating good and bad is a very good place to start, because remembering that was actually removed, that there is no good and bad. There is only unconditional love, which is bullshit. So it is coming back to that place of definitely understanding the morality is part of us as a human.
%.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Your story and your insights. Your willingness to dissect these experiences helps us all make sense of the patterns that bind people to these high control groups and these cultic systems. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I do hope you get some sleep now, because it's very, very late there.
Well, it's almost like going back in time, back to my cultic days when we were doing the extra long, workshops until 3 or 4 in the morning. So it's been a while since I've done that. But no, I do appreciate taking the time for this. So thank you. And people can find you on Instagram, just at Mark
Instagram,
Vicente.
Mark Vicente, my website, markvicente.com.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can find out everything about me there.
Perfect. We'll put all his details in the show notes too as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.